Pack your things now. Preston Kennedy didn't even look up from his tablet when he said it. After 26 years of building this place, that's how it ends. I'm Caleb Rodriguez, 49 years old, and until that Tuesday morning in March, I was Chief Technology Officer at TechGuard Systems. The company I helped build from 12 people in a warehouse to 800 employees across 3 states. Excuse me? I said, saving the encryption algorithm I'd been debugging since 4 a.m. Old habits. Never lose code, even when your world's falling apart. Preston finally looked at me. 32 years old, MBA from Wharton, wearing a suit that cost more than most people's cars. He'd inherited the CEO position 2 years ago when his father died, and he'd been cleaning house ever since, getting rid of what he called legacy thinking. We're restructuring the tech division, he continued, like he was reading from a script, moving toward more agile methodologies. Your approach feels outdated. Outdated. Right. This from a guy who couldn't debug a Hello World program if his trust fund depended on it. I'd spent 8 years in the Navy as a cryptographer before joining TechGuard in 1998. I understood secure communications before Preston learned to tie his shoes. The company's evolving, Caleb. We need fresh thinking, disruptive innovation. He loved throwing around buzzwords he'd learned in business school. If you're not comfortable adapting to our new direction, the door's right there. I looked around my office, the whiteboards covered with encryption formulas, the certificates on the wall from the Department of Defense, the photo of my team celebrating when we'd won the Pentagon's cybersecurity contract 3 years ago. 26 years of my life reduced to pack your things. I thought about my son Jake, 21 years old, finishing his computer science degree at Texas A&M. How I'd missed his high school graduation because our entire network crashed during a joint military exercise and I spent 4 days straight rebuilding it. How I'd explained to him that some things were more important than being there for pizza night or baseball games, that protecting our country's communications was worth the sacrifice. Preston was still talking. Something about right-sizing for efficiency and leveraging synergies. Corporate speak for I'm firing people because consultants told me to. I didn't argue. Didn't remind him that the adaptive threat protocol he bragged about in investor meetings was something I'd sketched out during a 2003 crisis, when terrorists had tried to penetrate our defense networks. Didn't mention that every encryption key his company used was based on algorithms I'd developed in my basement office at 2 a.m. I'll need your badge and laptop, he said. My laptop? I almost laughed. You mean the laptop with 15 years of proprietary code that I wrote? Company property, Caleb. I'm sure you understand. Company property. Everything I'd built, everything I'd sacrificed for, suddenly became company property the moment some spoiled kid decided I was disposable. I closed the laptop, unplugged it, and handed it over. 26 years, and I was walking out empty-handed. Except for one thing Preston didn't know about. One thing nobody in that building remembered. Here's what Preston Kennedy didn't understand about the tech industry. When you fire the architect, you better make sure you own the blueprints. And the most valuable blueprint in TechGuard's entire portfolio, the one worth $800 million to the Pentagon, didn't belong to them. It belonged to me. I didn't go straight home. Instead, I drove to Murphy's Bar, the same dive where I used to take my junior engineers after successful penetration tests. The kind of place where nobody cares if you're a CTO or a janitor, where the beer's cold and the TV's always tuned to whatever game is on. I ordered a Budweiser and tried to process what had just happened. 26 years. I joined TechGuard when it was small enough that everyone knew everyone's kids' names. Back then, we had a mission: build communication security systems that could save lives, keep the good guys connected and the bad guys out. The heart of that mission, the algorithm that would eventually become our adaptive threat protocol, came from something I built during a crisis in 2003. Foreign hackers had penetrated 3 different military networks in 1 week. Our clients were panicking. The Pentagon was threatening to pull all contracts. I spent 72 hours straight in the office, running on black coffee and determination. My ex-wife Lisa was already complaining that I cared more about computers than family. She wasn't entirely wrong. But what she didn't understand was that this wasn't just about computers. This was about protecting the men and women serving overseas, keeping their communications secure so they could come home safe. I wrote the first version of Adaptive Threat Protocol in 1 marathon session, testing it against every attack vector I could think of. It wasn't pretty code, but it worked. It worked so well that it became the foundation for everything TechGuard built afterward. Everyone called it Rodriguez's patch back then. Marketing renamed it later because adaptive threat protocol sounded better in government presentations. But the core algorithm, the mathematical heart that made it all possible, that was mine. The thing is, I never fully transferred the original provisional patent. Not because I was planning some elaborate revenge scheme. Hell, back in 2003, I trusted TechGuard more than I trusted my own bank account. We were family, or so I thought. But during one of those crazy growth periods, new investors every quarter, legal teams shuffling like deck chairs, compliance officers coming and going, my old Navy buddy Owen Mitchell gave me some advice. Owen had gotten out before me and become a patent attorney specializing in defense technology. Cal, he said over beers at a veterans networking event, file the provisional under your own name first. You can assign it to the company once all the paperwork settles. But protect yourself. I've seen too many good engineers get screwed by legal departments that don't know a motherboard from a sandwich. So I did exactly what Owen suggested. Filed the provisional patent under my name. Caleb Rodriguez, not TechGuard Systems, not any subsidiary, just me. I figured I'd transfer it officially once things calmed down. Except, things never calmed down. Mergers, acquisitions, budget cuts, new executives who acted like code wrote itself. The paperwork got buried under 20 years of corporate reorganizations, and I got busy building systems, mentoring engineers, keeping America's network secure. 26 years later, Preston Kennedy had just fired me without cause, which meant something buried deep in the fine print of my original employment contract had just activated. Something that was about to turn his world upside down. I finished my beer and drove home to my empty house in Cedar Park. My German Shepherd Rex lifted his head when I walked in, tail moving slowly. Dogs always know when something's changed. After the divorce 3 years ago, it was just me and Rex in a house that felt too big for 2 bachelors. I poured myself 2 fingers of bourbon, the good stuff I saved for special occasions, and opened the bottom drawer of my desk. Most people keep junk down there. I keep history. Old contracts, faded notebooks, system diagrams from projects that changed the world, and at the very bottom, untouched for over a decade, a thin manila envelope. No label, no filing system. Just waiting. Inside was the original provisional patent application for what would become adaptive threat protocol. My handwriting, my diagrams, my signature. Filed under Caleb E. Rodriguez in March 2003, right after that terrorist cyber attack crisis. Clipped to it was Owen's handwritten note from all those years ago. If they ever forget your value, this will remind them who really built their empire. I sat back in my leather chair, the one luxury I'd bought myself after the Pentagon contract, and let the reality sink in. Preston Kennedy hadn't just fired me. He'd just triggered a legal clause that returned an $800 million technology to its actual owner, me. The irony was beautiful. In trying to get rid of legacy thinking, Preston had just activated the most legacy piece of paperwork in TechGuard's entire history. I didn't sleep that night, not from anxiety. That part of me had burned out somewhere around year 15 of missing family dinners for emergency system patches. But from clarity. The kind that only comes when all the pieces finally click into place. At 5:30 a.m., I sat at my kitchen table with the provisional patent spread out like a battle plan. The diagrams looked primitive compared to today's architecture, but the core mathematical engine, the algorithmic DNA of adaptive threat protocol, was unmistakably mine. I opened my personal laptop and pulled up my encrypted archive, one I'd maintained since joining the company. Inside were 26 years of drafts, legal correspondence, Owen's old emails, and one file I'd forgotten about. Contract reversion template.doc, last modified August 2007. Owen had created it during one of our quarterly catch-ups, back when we still thought the worst thing that could happen was budget cuts. Just in case, he'd said, laughing. You never know when some MBA decides engineers are disposable. We'd joked about it over wings and beer. Funny how jokes turn into lifelines. I filled in the template. Date, timestamp, patent identification number, contract clause reference, supporting documentation. The USPTO's electronic filing system accepted my credentials. I'd maintained my individual inventor status for 20 years even while employed. 1 click, 2 confirmations. Digital signature verified, submitted. That was it. The reversion was officially in motion. Within hours, the United States Patent and Trademark Office database would update, and TechGuard's most critical intellectual property would legally belong to one person, Caleb E. Rodriguez. At 6:45 a.m., my phone rang. Owen never calls this early. Cal, his voice was tight, like he'd been up all night too. Please tell me you didn't file anything yet. Submitted 10 minutes ago. Long pause. Jesus. I'm looking at your original contract right now. The reversion clause is still active. They never updated it through any of the corporate restructures. And since Preston fired you without cause, the trigger's automatic, I finished. You didn't just reclaim a patent, Cal. You reclaimed the foundation of their entire Pentagon relationship. The adaptive threat protocol isn't just software. It's the architecture for every classified communication system they manage. Owen's voice dropped. When the USPTO updates this morning, TechGuard can't even demonstrate their own systems without your permission. If they try anyway, that's willful patent infringement. In federal court, against defense contracts, what kind of damages are we talking about? Triple damages for willful infringement, plus injunctive relief, plus attorney fees. Owen was clearly pulling up legal precedents as he talked. Cal, TechGuard's entire quarterly revenue wouldn't cover single damages, let alone triple, if they walk into their Pentagon review next week without resolving this. The Pentagon review. I'd forgotten. TechGuard was scheduled to present their latest security upgrades to the Department of Defense on Friday, 5 days from now. Every senator, general, and procurement officer who mattered would be in that room. And they couldn't legally turn on their own system without my authorization. By 7:20 a.m., my phone started lighting up. Messages from colleagues who had no idea their entire company had just shifted under their feet. Heard Preston cleaned house yesterday. You okay? What's this about some kind of patent issue? Legal's going crazy. Something about ownership disputes. One message stood out from Brooke Matthews, the VP of Engineering and the only executive who'd ever fought for my team's budget. Cal, Preston's walking around like he owns the world this morning, says he's presenting next-generation Rodriguez architecture to the Pentagon Friday. Please tell me he didn't fire the wrong person. I stared at that message for a full minute. Preston was planning to present Rodriguez architecture to the Pentagon, the same architecture he no longer had legal right to use, the same architecture that now belonged to the man he'd just fired. I typed back, he fired the architect, but forgot who owns the blueprints. Her response came immediately. Holy shit, how bad is this going to get? By 9:30 a.m., the first real tremor hit TechGuard. Mason Clark, a junior developer I'd mentored through 3 different programming languages, forwarded me an internal email with the subject line, Urgent, IP ownership verification required. The message was short but panicked. Legal department requesting immediate verification of all core system patents. Routine audit discovered discrepancy in adaptive threat protocol ownership records. Caleb Rodriguez listed as registered owner in USPTO database. Assume this is database error, need confirmation before Pentagon presentation. Poor Mason had no idea he was looking at the beginning of the end. 20 minutes later, another forwarded email, this one from Lucas Thompson, a systems architect who'd survived 4 different corporate reorganizations with me. Emergency legal meeting called. All senior staff. Preston just told everyone to ignore administrative errors in patent database and proceed with Friday's presentation as planned. Administrative errors. Preston actually thought he could wish away federal patent law with executive confidence. But the lawyers knew better. They'd pulled the original filings, cross-referenced the timestamps, verified the contract clauses, and then someone, probably some paralegal making $45,000 a year, did what no executive dared to do. They checked the public USPTO database. Owner, Caleb Rodriguez. Status, active. Reversion, date, yesterday. Trigger, involuntary termination without cause. Everything TechGuard had built for the last 20 years now belonged to the man they'd just thrown away. At 11:45 a.m., the real earthquake hit. I was fixing breakfast for Rex when my phone buzzed with a message from Taylor Adams, a board liaison who'd quietly observed every executive meeting for the past 5 years. Taylor was smart enough to stay silent, but observant enough to see everything. Her message was direct. Caleb, did you file something with the USPTO yesterday? Seeing major patent ownership discussions. Preston's telling everyone it's corporate sabotage. Sabotage. Of course, Preston would frame his own legal incompetence as some kind of conspiracy. The guy who couldn't manage a software update without consultants was going to solve patent law through sheer willpower. I typed back, "No sabotage, just contract enforcement." Her response came within seconds. "Board meeting called for 2 p.m. They have the legal memo. Preston didn't tell them he fired you. Perfect." Preston had buried my termination in a routine headcount adjustment, figuring the board was too focused on the Pentagon presentation to read the fine print. Which meant when the patent reversion memo landed in their inboxes this morning, it hit like a financial missile. The board still believed their chief technology architect was happily employed, preparing for the most important presentation of the year. They had no idea that same architect now owned the technology they were planning to demonstrate. At 12:30, another forwarded email reached me, this time from Garrett Wilson, our CTO. Garrett was a good guy, a real engineer who'd worked his way up from junior developer. He understood both code and politics, which made him invaluable and miserable in equal measure. His message to the senior staff was short but devastating. Legal has confirmed patent ownership issue is real. Adaptive threat protocol ownership has reverted to Caleb Rodriguez per contract clause 15.7.3. Cannot proceed with Pentagon presentation without licensing agreement. I could picture Garrett's face when he sent that email. The man had spent 3 sleepless nights preparing technical demonstrations, coordinating with Pentagon officials, reviewing every security protocol. Now he had to tell his team that their star product legally belonged to someone else, someone they'd just fired. At 1:15, Brooke Matthews called me directly. "Cal," she said, sounding like she'd aged 10 years overnight, "tell me there's a way to fix this." "Fix what?" "Preston just came out of an emergency legal meeting. He's telling everyone the patent filing is fraudulent, says you're trying to extort the company." Her voice dropped. "But legal's saying something different. They're saying we're completely screwed." "What exactly are they saying?" "That every system demonstration, every client presentation, every Pentagon briefing for the last 15 years has been based on technology we don't actually own. And now the owner is..." She paused. "Well, not employed here anymore." The beautiful irony wasn't lost on me. Preston had fired me to eliminate legacy thinking, but the most valuable legacy in the company's history was the legal document that now protected my intellectual property. "Brooke," I said carefully, "what would it take to make this right?" "I don't know. That's above my pay grade." "But Cal," her voice got serious, "whatever Preston did to you yesterday, I want you to know that most of us thought it was insane. You built this place. You trained half the senior staff. You've saved our contracts more times than anyone wants to count. I appreciate that. The board's meeting in an hour. They're going to want to talk to you." At 2:45, my phone rang. The caller ID showed Lucas Hayes, chairman of the board. Lucas was old-school Texas business, the kind of man who'd built his fortune in oil before transitioning to tech. He didn't call people unless millions of dollars were on the line. "Caleb," his voice was carefully neutral, "we need to talk. I figured you might. We've reviewed the patent documentation. Appears there's been a significant oversight in our legal processes." "Oversight. Corporate speak for we fired the wrong person and now we're fucked." I stayed quiet. In negotiations, silence is often the most powerful weapon. "We'd like to schedule a meeting," Lucas continued. "Something discreet. Away from the office." "Why discreet?" Long pause. "Because if word gets out that we don't own our core technology, our stock price will crater before market close. Pentagon contracts will disappear. Competitors will smell blood." "Lucas," I said slowly, "are you aware that presenting adaptive threat protocol at Friday's Pentagon review without proper licensing constitutes willful patent infringement?" Another pause, longer this time. "Yes. Our legal team has made that clear, and willful infringement carries triple damages." "Yes. Plus injunctive relief that could shut down your entire operation." "Yes." His voice was getting tighter with each admission. "So you're not calling to negotiate. You're calling because you can't legally operate your business without me." Silence stretched between us like a taut wire. When Lucas finally spoke, his voice had lost all pretense of authority. What would it take to resolve this situation? I didn't answer immediately, not because I was unsure, but because I wanted him to understand something fundamental. This wasn't a negotiation between equals. This was a reckoning. "Send me a meeting location," I said finally. "And make sure Preston's there, along with anyone else who thinks 26 years of service can be dismissed with a pink slip. Caleb, I hope we can work something out that benefits everyone." "Lucas," I said, "you fired the architect. Now you're asking him to save the building from collapse. The terms aren't going to be what you expect." After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen with Rex at my feet, thinking about my father. He'd worked 35 years at the same manufacturing plant before they shut it down and moved operations to Mexico. "Son," he'd told me when I got my first tech job, "loyalty's a one-way street these days. Companies will use you up and throw you away the moment it's convenient." I'd thought tech would be different. Thought if you built something valuable enough, created something that mattered, they'd never dispose of you like outdated equipment. I was wrong about the loyalty part, but I was right about building something valuable. And now Preston Kennedy was about to learn exactly how valuable it was. They chose the Riverside Hotel for our meeting, a place with private conference rooms where deals get made and careers get destroyed. I arrived at 6 p.m. sharp wearing my best Navy dress uniform. Not because I had to, but because I wanted Preston to remember exactly who he was dealing with. The tension in that room could have powered a server farm. Lucas Hayes stood at the head of the table trying to project leadership. Preston sat rigid in his chair, jaw clenched like he was chewing glass. Garrett Wilson looked like he hadn't slept in 3 days, which he probably hadn't. Brooke Matthews gave me a small nod, the only friendly acknowledgement I'd get. "Caleb," Lucas gestured to the empty chair across from him. "Thank you for coming." I sat down and placed a single folder on the polished conference table. Inside was everything they needed to know about their situation, everything they'd forgotten when they decided I was disposable. Preston broke first, just like I knew he would. "Before this gets blown out of proportion," he said, "I want everyone to understand that your termination was a business decision, nothing personal." I looked him dead in the eye. Triggering the patent reversion was a legal consequence. Nothing personal. Lucas cleared his throat. "Let's focus on solutions. The Pentagon review is Friday morning. Without licensing rights to adaptive threat protocol, we can't legally demonstrate our systems." Garrett nodded miserably. Every security layer, every encryption module, every threat detection algorithm, it all traces back to Caleb's original architecture. We'd be presenting stolen technology to the Department of Defense. "Which is why," Lucas continued, "we're hoping to work out a licensing agreement that benefits everyone." I opened my folder and pulled out a single sheet of paper. "These are my terms. All non-negotiable." Preston scoffed. "You're not exactly in a position to make demands." I smiled for the first time in 3 days. "Preston, your company's stock is going to crater the moment investors realize you don't own your core technology. Your Pentagon contracts will evaporate. Your competitors are going to eat you alive. I'm not making demands. I'm offering you a lifeline." Lucas gestured for me to continue. "First," I said, "TechGuard pays me $50 million for immediate licensing rights to continue operations through the Pentagon review." Both Lucas and Preston's faces went pale. That was more cash than they had liquid. Second, full public recognition as the original architect of adaptive threat protocol. No more calling it company innovation. Garrett actually nodded at that one. He'd always known who really built the system. Third, Preston resigns. Effective immediately. The room went dead silent. Preston shot up from his chair. "Absolutely not. I'm not stepping down because some disgruntled employee is holding the company hostage." "Some disgruntled employee?" I stood up slowly, all 6 feet 2 inches of me. "Son, I built this company while you were learning to drive. I've saved more government contracts than you've read PowerPoints. And yesterday, you threw me away like yesterday's code." Lucas held up a hand. "Let's all stay calm." "And fourth," I continued, sitting back down, "I'm not coming back to TechGuard. I'm starting my own company, Secure Core Industries, and I'll be taking some key personnel with me." The final blow landed like a cruise missile. Not only were they losing their core technology, they were about to lose their best engineers to a competitor run by the man who created their most valuable assets. Brooke leaned forward. "Caleb, what about the Pentagon contracts? What about them? You know those systems better than anyone. If TechGuard loses them, then the Pentagon will find new contractors. Better contractors." I looked directly at Preston. Contractors who actually own their technology. Lucas was frantically calculating numbers in his head. The licensing fee, 50 million is... More than you have, I finished, which brings us to option B. There's an option B, Garrett asked. TechGuard can refuse my terms, in which case I file for injunctive relief Monday morning. Your Pentagon presentation gets canceled, your stock price collapses, your government contracts disappear, and I still start Secure Core Industries, except now I'm doing it with a clean slate instead of licensing my old work back to you. The math was simple and brutal. Either they paid me $50 million and bought themselves time to figure out their future, or they paid nothing and watched their company disappear. Preston was looking around the room desperately, searching for someone to save his career. Nobody met his eyes. We need time to consider, Lucas said. You have until 8 a.m. tomorrow. That's when I start making calls to Mason Clark, Lucas Thompson, and about a dozen other engineers who've been waiting for someone to treat them like professionals instead of disposable resources. I stood up and headed for the door. Caleb, Lucas called after me. What happens if we agree to your terms? I turned back. Then you might survive long enough to rebuild. Maybe even learn something about respecting the people who actually create value. The call came at 7:23 a.m. Lucas's voice was defeated but decisive. We accept your terms. Preston submitted his resignation an hour ago. The board approved the licensing agreement. Transfer details are being arranged. That was 18 months ago. Secure Core Industries now employs 85 people, including Mason Clark as my lead architect and Lucas Thompson as head of systems integration. We just won a $1.2 billion cybersecurity contract with the Department of Homeland Security. TechGuard? They're still around, barely. Turns out paying $50 million for technology you thought you owned for free doesn't leave much room for innovation. Their stock is trading at about 40 cents on the dollar. Preston Kennedy tried starting his own consulting firm. Last I heard, he was giving seminars on disruptive leadership strategies. The irony is perfect. You know what I learned after 26 years in this business? Your value doesn't disappear when someone fails to see it. It just waits for the right moment to remind everyone who actually built what matters. Sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even. It's getting better, much better. And sometimes when they fire you to make room for fresh thinking, the freshest thing you can do is show them what they just threw away. Rex and I are doing fine, by the way. We've got a bigger backyard now.